soul. A word, a concept, that over time has lost more and more meaning. For too many it is something non-existent, while others are completely indifferent to it. And you, which of these groups do you think you belong to? The soul is a complex concept that gets lost in the various cultural, philosophical, and religious interpretations. In general terms, it is seen as the essence or vital principle of an individual and is often associated with consciousness. Usually we find traces of it in various religions, so let's see how they approach the topic. In Christian tradition, the soul is often considered immortal and individual. It is seen as a divine gift, created by God, and destined for eternal life after death. The precise nature of the soul depends on the specific doctrines of each Christian denomination. But its destiny is to be judged after death, with no second chances. In Islamic tradition, the soul, nafs, is considered immortal, individual, created by God, and judged after death based on the actions performed during life. In this case as well, there is no second chance, and Jannah, the heaven, is not guaranteed for anyone. In Hinduism, the soul, called Atman, is considered eternal and a part of a cosmic principle called Brahman. Reincarnation is a key concept. The soul goes through many lives and is influenced by the actions performed in previous lives. In Buddhism, there is no concept of a permanent or unchanging soul. It teaches the idea of anatta or anatman, the absence of a permanent self. This illusion must be overcome to attain nirvana, the state of liberation from suffering and the cycle of rebirths. Concepts of the soul in Judaism can vary, but generally it is considered immortal and individual. And similar to Christianity, it is judged by God for the actions performed during life. But let's not dwell too much on religions, since almost all seem to agree that there is something beyond our physical body, and that some form of life exists after death. Some might define the soul and the afterlife as a mere belief or fairy tale, perhaps driven by an unconscious need. But if we consider the fact that people from all over the world, from all eras, and of different cultural, religious, and linguistic backgrounds, have always believed in something that transcends life in the material world, it's hard to dismiss it in such a way. If this belief is present among both the most technologically advanced societies and the most prehistoric and isolated ones, then there must be some truth to it. However, this does not mean that it is merely an abstract concept. So, let's see what has been discovered from a scientific perspective. A part of science has always attempted to prove its existence, not just relying on theories, but providing tools and repeatable demonstrations to show that something real does exist. But what experiments have been conducted in this regard? Around 1902, the American doctor Duncan McDougall had the idea of measuring the weight of the soul in an attempt to prove its existence. He weighed dying individuals of various ages, genders, body types, social backgrounds, and with different illnesses, just moments before and after their death, using extremely precise scales, with a margin of error of just 5 grams. He found that in all cases there was a weight change, almost always immediate, of about 21 grams before and after death. In one case, however, involving a robust and sedentary man, the weight change occurred a few minutes after death, but it was still approximately 21 grams. During this study, many factors were considered, such as the loss of bodily fluids, sweating, urine, oxygen, and nitrogen. Experiments were also conducted on dogs, with no variation in weight observed. Of course, there were the usual refutations and verbal accusations from colleagues. However, after this, no similar experiments have ever been conducted. Until 1917, when Harry Twining, a physics teacher from Los Angeles, attempted the same experiment on mice, reaching the same conclusions as McDougall. That is, no change in weight for the animals. Over the years, very many people have claimed to have had an NDE, near-death experience. And all of them, once they returned to this dimension, not only shared common details about the afterlife, their deceased loved ones, the tunnel or light portal, and floating above their lifeless body, but some even described medical details about the procedures that were being performed on their body at the time. Even people who were blind from birth have been able to describe in great detail, because they saw it, what doctors and nurses were doing in the room. Some of them have also received messages to deliver to complete strangers, to then verify their accuracy, disproving in that way that their experience in the afterlife was real and not simply a figment of their imagination. And we're talking about ordinary people, but also doctors, surgeons, biologists, and scientists of all kinds, believers and non-believers, who have been unable to explain rationally what they experienced and felt. But all of them have always received a way to verify their experience once they return to life, leading to a radical shift in their spiritual beliefs. Entanglement, or quantum correlation, is a phenomenon in quantum mechanics, where two or more particles become interconnected, such that the state of one particle instantly affects the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. Various researchers have observed and demonstrated that this phenomenon also exists between human beings. In fact, emotionally connected people remain mentally interconnected, even if they live on different continents. Professor Giuseppe Genovesi, for example, experimented with the interconnection between a subject and a portion of their DNA. In practice, by producing emotional stimuli in the subject, the histones of the DNA, even when observed at great distances, will undergo structural changes. So, if the subject was relaxed, the histones were not contracted, and the portion of DNA was longer, while with anxiety-inducing stimuli, that portion would contract instantly. This means that in the future, it may be possible to intervene on the pathologies affecting a person, even from a distance. But let's get back to the soul. The research of Professor Stuart Hameroff, an American neurobiologist and anesthetist, and professor at the University of Arizona, with the participation of the mathematical physicist Roger Penrose, demonstrated that these synchronous behaviors of the quanta also occur in the microtubules present in our brain. These microtubules, that are filaments with a diameter of about 25 nanometers, are present inside nerve cells, neurons, and are responsible for quantum correlation. They are formed by tubulins, cellular proteins, that are in quantum correlation with each other, thus forming a network of billions of constantly connected particles, like in a quantum computer. When these particles collapse, or rather, when the collapse of the wave function occurs, you have what is called a state of consciousness, and it happens about every 40th of a second in humans. While, in someone who meditates, it happens every 100th of a second or so. Each of these millions of moments of consciousness brings with it new information, which our brain decodes as a new insight. So the brain is nothing more than an interface between the quantum world and the binary material world. Certainly not the creator of consciousness. The two scientists then discovered that, at the moment of death, these quantum systems come out of the microtubules to spread into the universe. While in cases of near death, when the person comes back to life, this information returns inside the microtubules of the brain. But how do we want to define this information, and where does it come from? Obviously, the two researchers did not go into the merits of the question, but such a process seems to be exactly what happens with the soul when, at the moment of death, it comes out and detaches itself from the physical body, changing dimensional plane. However, we could tell you about other similar research, such as the one on the division of the two hemispheres of the brain that aimed, in the 60s and 70s, to affirm that consciousness resided in the brain, thus excluding the concepts of soul and spirit. Instead, they obtained the opposite result because consciousness remained one, confirming the existence of something that goes beyond matter, beyond the brain. But we prefer to avoid dwelling too much on scientific topics. However, there are those who say that in these discoveries, there is little science and a lot of chatter, forgetting that it is precisely one of the peculiarities of quantum sciences to be only chatter because they have as proof the sole observation of the effects. Do you remember the previous video about the existence of God? But of course, the science of matter and its lackey spokespersons are far from understanding what the soul is and what is the origin of the light that emanates it, as it is neither observable nor measurable by us, except through the effects it produces. Speaking of light, other research has recently confirmed Hameroff's hypotheses, such as that of Zefei Liu from Shanghai University. Up to now, we have only spoken of soul, but this is such an overused simplification to the point of making it something abstract and insignificant. In fact, everyone mentions it, but no one really knows it. The reality, therefore, is much more complex, and we will try, as always, to make it accessible to everyone. Man in this dimension is the result of three-dimensional values, different from each other, but which operate together. Let's look at them in more detail. The spirit is the individual intelligence. It springs from the creative spirit of the cosmos and is immortal and immutable. It coordinates, instructs, determines, and produces the operative process of the soul with which it is always in contact. In fact, soul and spirit are inseparable throughout the entire experimental cycle in the space-time dimensions. The soul, or astral, springs from the light created by the creative spirit of the cosmos and is immortal, but mutable. It coordinates and instructs the material body and determines its vitality and the services necessary for the spirit to carry out the activity essential to the continuous becoming of the cosmos. The material body arises from the astral light, to which it is closely linked, and on which its vitality and dynamism depend. And, as we well know, it is mortal and mutable. In fact, it changes when the astral light definitively detaches itself due to the achieved experimentation of the spirit. But as usual, let's try to clarify things a bit. The concepts expressed so far are enormous to explain and involve various sciences, but trying to be as clear as possible, we can say that we are the spirit, the conscious and intelligent self, or energy emanating directly from the macrocosmic being. And who is this macrocosmic being? We saw it in the previous video. He is the one we should identify as the true and only God, whose spirit is that primary intelligence that created everything. We suggest you go and watch it again. The soul, or astral body, is instead the evolutionary result of the psychic dynamics of the three lower kingdoms: mineral, vegetal, and animal. An energetic structure created by that energy called light and emanated into matter by the macrocosmic being. In practice, it is the body with which the spirit is able to access the material dimension and interface itself with the physical body. It also acts as a recorder, storing our experiences and emotions lived in our life, and which will serve as a tool for judge ourselves when we leave this life. Therefore, the soul, in addition to representing the channel through which the spirit can interact with the material dimension, represents the energy that allows our body to function. Without the soul, the physical body shuts down. Without energy, it stops functioning. By reincarnating, the spirit abandons the old astral, which becomes a parallel existence and which it often visits, but which does not condition it in the new experimental evolutionary process. The evolution of the spirit instead will continue until it becomes a god itself, being able to create its own universe, to further evolve in perfection. But now, we don't want to bore you with too high concepts. Suffice it to say that our spirit is connected with God, who, thanks to our evolution, evolves in turn. It is an infinite evolutionary cycle that is impossible for us to fully understand. But what is the purpose of all this infinite evolution? In the end, there is no purpose. For the simple reason that if the macrocosmic being is pure love, love does not need a purpose. If you do something for love, you don't do it to expect something or to get something in return. You do it, period. This is why we must learn to love everyone and everything, and without a purpose, so that we can evolve too. We also repeated it in the last video. Love is the only way, and it is what moves everything. It is the force that science today calls weak force, but which is not weak at all. It is indeed the most powerful force in the entire cosmos. The spirit, therefore, is our true self. And life is nothing more than a means that grants us the opportunity to evolve, erasing every trace of evil from the dark past through the good things that we see and do. And that explains what karma is. Our spirit, together with the unconditional love of God, gives us a great opportunity, because He knows very well what we need in this life to be able to rebalance our karmic scales. But it is something that we cannot do alone, but together with other souls and spirits that we have chosen and who have chosen us even before facing this life. Evolution, therefore, is absolutely not an individual and selfish path, and we must learn to give and receive this support with love if we want to evolve, as individuals, as a society, but above all, as an entire planet. If you want to know more, check out the full article on our website. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell, so you don't miss any updates on the latest revealed truths.